One of the traditional methods of imposing statism or socialism on a people has been by way of medicine. It's very easy to disguise a medical program as a humanitarian project. Most people are a little reluctant to oppose anything that suggests medical care for people who possibly can't afford it. Congressman Farrand introduced the Farrand Bill. This was the idea that all people of Social Security age should be brought under a program of compulsory health insurance. Now, this would not only be our senior citizens, this would be the dependents and those who are disabled. This would be young people if they are dependents of someone eligible for Social Security. Now, Congressman Farrand brought the program out on that idea of just for that particular group of people. But Congressman Farrand was subscribing to this foot-in-the-door philosophy because he said, if we can only break through and get our foot inside the door, then we can expand the program after that. Walter Reuther said, it's no secret that the United Automobile Workers is officially on record as backing a program of national health insurance. And by national health insurance, he meant socialized medicine for every American. Now, Congressman Farrand is no longer a congressman of the United States government. He has been replaced, not in his particular assignment, but in his backing of such a bill by Congressman King of California. It is presented in the idea of a great emergency that millions of our senior citizens are unable to provide needed medical care. But this ignores the fact that in the last decade, 127 million of our citizens, in just 10 years, have come under the protection of some form of privately owned medical or hospital insurance. Now, the advocates of this bill, when you try to oppose it, challenge you on an emotional basis. They say, what would you do? Throw these poor old people out to die with no medical attention? That's ridiculous, and of course no one has advocated it. As a matter of fact, in the last session of Congress, a bill was adopted known as the Kerr-Mills Bill. Now, without even allowing this bill to be tried to see if it works, they have introduced this King bill, which is really the Farrand bill. What is the Kerr-Mills Bill? It is a frank recognition of the medical need or problem of senior citizens that I've mentioned. And it has provided from the federal government money to the states and the local communities that can be used at the discretion of the state to help those people who need it. Now, what reason could the other people have for backing a bill which says we insist on compulsory health insurance for senior citizens on a basis of age alone, regardless of whether they are worth millions of dollars, whether they have an income, whether they're protected by their own insurance, whether they have savings?
I believe the effort in which we're engaged is worth the time and effort of all of us. I come from Boston, Massachusetts, near Faneuil Hall, where for a whole period of years, meetings were held by interested citizens in order to lay the groundwork for American independence. And while there may be some who say that the business of government is so important that it should be confined to those who govern, in this free society of ours, the consent, and may I say the support of the citizens of this country is essential if this or any other piece of progressive legislation is going to be passed. Make no mistake about it. Make no mistake about it. Now, why are we here? What is the issue which divides and arouses so much concern? I will take a case which may be typical. A family which may be found in any part of the United States. The husband has worked hard for his life and he is retired. He might have been a clerk or a salesman or on the road or worked in a factory, stores or whatever. He's always wanted to pay his own way. He does not ask anyone to care for him. He wants to care for himself. He has raised his own family. He has educated them. His children are now on their own. He and his wife are drawing Social Security. It may run $75, $100, $125 in the higher brackets. Let's say it's $100. And he has a pension from where he worked, the results of years of effort. Now, therefore, his basic needs are taken care of. He owns his house. He has $2,500 or $3,000 in the bank. And then his wife gets sick. And we're all going to be in a hospital, 9 out of 10 of us, before we finally pass away, and particularly when we're over 65. Now she is sick, not just for a week, but for a long time. First goes the $2,500. That's gone. Next, he mortgages his house, even though he may have some difficulty making the payments out of his Social Security. Then he goes to his children, who themselves are heavily burdened because they're paying for their house, and they're paying for their sicknesses, and they want to educate their children. Then their savings begin to go. This is not a rare case. I talked to a member of the Congress from my own state a week ago who told me he was going to send his daughter away to school, but because his father had been sick for 2 years, he could not do it. And Congressman, I pay $22,500 a year. And that's more than most people get. So therefore now, what is he going to do? His savings are gone, his children's savings, they're contributing, though they have responsibilities of their own. And he finally goes in and signs a petition saying he's broke and needs assistance. Now, what do we say? We say that during his working years, he will contribute to Social Security as he has in the case of his retirement, $12 or $13 a month. When he becomes ill, or she becomes ill over a long period of time, he first pays $90 so that people will not abuse it. But then let's say he has a bill of $1,500. This bill is not that we're talking about Mr. Anderson's bill and Mr. King solve everything, but let's say it's $1,500, of which $1,000 are hospital bills. This bill will pay that $1,000 in hospital bill. And then I believe that he and the effort he makes in his family can meet his other responsibilities. Now, that does not seem such an extraordinary piece of legislation 25 years after Franklin Roosevelt passed the Social Security Act.
Today, the relationship between patient and doctor in this country is something to be envied any place. The privacy, the care that is given to a person, the right to choose a doctor, the right to go from one doctor to the other. But let's also look from the other side at the freedom the doctor loses. A doctor would be reluctant to say this. Well, like you, I'm only a patient, so I can say it in his behalf. The doctor begins to lose freedoms. It's like telling a lie, and one leads to another. First, you decide that the doctor can have so many patients. They're equally divided among the various doctors by the government. But then the doctors aren't equally divided geographically. So a doctor decides he wants to practice in one town, and the government has to say to him, you can't live in that town. They already have enough doctors. You have to go someplace else. And from here, it's only a short step to dictating where he will go. This is a freedom that I wonder whether any of us have the right to take from any human being.
In the first place, there isn't one person here who isn't indebted to the doctors of this country. Children are not born on an 8-hour day. All of us have been the beneficiary of their help. This is not a campaign against doctors because doctors have joined with us. This is a campaign to help people meet their responsibilities. No one would become a doctor just as a business enterprise. It's a long, laborious discipline. We need more of them. We want their help, and gradually we're getting it. We do not affect the freedom of choice. You can go to any doctor you want. The doctor and you work out your arrangements with him. We talk about his hospital bills, and that's an entirely different matter. All these arguments were made against Social Security at the time of Franklin Roosevelt. They're made today. The mail pours in, and at least half of the mail which I receive in the White House and on this issue and others is wholly misinformed. And why is that so? Because there are so many busy men in Washington who write. Some organizations have 600, 700, and 800 people spreading mail across the country, asking doctors and others to write in and tell your congressman you're opposed to it. The mail pours into the White House, into the Congress and Senator's office. Congressmen and senators feel people are opposed to it. Then they read a Gallup poll which says 75% of the people are in favor of it, and they say, what has happened to my mail? The point of the matter is that this meeting and the others indicates that the people of the United States recognize, one by one, thousand by thousand, million by million, that this is a problem whose solution is long overdue. And this year, I believe, or certainly as inevitably as the tide comes in next year, this bill is going to pass. And then other people say, why doesn't the government mind its own business? What is the government's business is the question. Harry Truman said that 14 million Americans had enough resources so that they could hire people in Washington to protect their interests, and the rest of them depended upon the President of the United States and others. This bill serves the public interest. It involves the government because it involves the public welfare. The Constitution of the United States did not make the President or the Congress powerless. It gave them definite responsibilities to advance the general welfare, and that is what we're attempting to do. And then I read that this bill will sap the individual self-reliance of Americans. I can't imagine anything worse or anything better to sap someone's self-reliance than to be sick, alone, broke, or to have saved for a lifetime and put it out in a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months. This argument that the government should stay out, that it saps our pioneer stock. I used to hear that argument when we were talking about raising the minimum wage to $1.25. I remember one day being asked to step out into the hall. And up the corridor came 4 distinguished-looking men with straw hats on and canes. They told me they had just flown in from a state in their private plane, and they wanted me to know that if we passed a bill providing for time and a half for service station attendants, who were then working about 55 to 60 hours at straight time, it would sap their self-reliance. The fact of the matter is, what saps anyone's self-reliance is working 60 hours at straight time, or working at 85 or 95 or $1 an hour. Or depending upon filling out a pauper's oath and and then getting it free. Nobody in this hall is asking for it for nothing. They are willing to contribute during their working years. That is the important principle which has been lost sight of. We are behind every country pretty nearly in Europe in this matter of medical care for our citizens. We are concerned with the progress of this country. And those who say that what we are now talking about spoils our great pioneer heritage should remember that the West was settled with 2 great actions by the national government. One, in President Lincoln's administration, when he gave a homestead to everyone who went west, and in 1862 he set aside government property to build our land-grant colleges. This cooperation between an alert and progressive citizenry and a progressive government is what has made this country great, and we shall continue as long as we have the opportunity to do so. And then finally, I had a letter last week saying you're going to take care of all the millionaires and they don't need it. I do not know how many millionaires we are talking about, but they won't mind contributing $12 a month to Social Security, and they may be among those who will apply for it when they go to the hospital. But what I will say is that the national government takes care of them, because over 65 they can deduct all their medical expenses. What we are concerned about is the person, not who has not got a cent, but those who saved and worked and then get hit. Then there are those who say, well, what happens if you die before you're 65? Well, there isn't. You really don't care. You have no guarantees. But what we are talking about is our people are living a long time. Their housing is inadequate. In many cases, their rehabilitation is inadequate. We've got great unfinished business in this country. And while this bill does not solve our problems in this area, I do not believe it is a valid argument to say this bill isn't going to do the job. It will not. But it will do part of it. Our housing bill last year for the elderly, that won't do the job, but it will begin. When we retrain workers, that won't take care of unemployment chronically in some areas, but it's a start. We aren't able overnight to solve all the problems that this country faces. But is that any good reason? That's what we're going to do today. We are trying. We are trying. And what we're talking about here is true in a variety of other ways. All the great revolutionary movements of the Franklin Roosevelt administration in the 30s we now take for granted. But I refuse to see us live on the accomplishments of another generation. I refuse to see this country and all of us shrink from these struggles, which are our responsibility in our time, because what we are now talking about in our children's day will seem to be the ordinary business of government. I think it's most appropriate that the President of the United States, whose business place is in Washington, should come to this city and participate in these rallies, because the business of government is the business of the people, and the people are right here.